Goes right to it. Good evening, everyone. Quick little project tonight. It's been a bit of a long day already in some ways. Craft show number 3 today. And we did something new. It'll help if I mark centers though. Doesn't always pay to watch other people's YouTube videos. Well, it does. This was actually a project that came from the AAW Journal. Forget what the date they said it was, but these are little lanterns using just a simple little battery operated tea light. Kind of a, I don't know, they're kind of a fun little project to do in some ways. So not a real lot of precision in it. The precision is, some of the precision would be getting a nice square blank. Blank is about 2, I think this one's about 2 inches square by about, this one's 2 1/4 by 5. You need about 5 inches in length. I have another one. I didn't drill the holes in that one. I'm not really necessarily planning on getting to that one. These are an inch and a 1/16. The diagram that I saw had a 1-inch hole in them. And I'm playing around going a little bit bigger on the holes. I think they look a little better with a little bit bigger hole in them. But once again, that's kind of an opinion kind of a thing. So I'm just playing around with it, and we sort of will go from there. Because my critic said that she liked the smaller holes. But I didn't get no real opinions on any that were sold today. I made 4 of them for the craft show today, and I only came home with 1 of them, so the people sort of liked them. At least some of the people liked them, so that's always a plus. They're relatively simple to make. As you'll see when we go along this little process here, there's really only one part of them that's a little bit troublesome. And I really shouldn't say it's necessarily troublesome, but it's kind of going to require a little bit of a different approach. We're just taking our blank around. And as I look down between the blank and the tool rest, I can see the ghost image in there. And I can see whether it's round or not round. I can lay the tool up on top, and you can see the tool still bounces. Really not that overly important that it's perfectly round at this point. So we'll take it to the round. We will put a tenon on it because we will need to grab it in the chuck. We'll use a smaller chuck. There's no need. I don't need a giant size chuck. It generally will get in the road doing this kind of stuff. So that's where we're at so far. Some ways they're a little bit like the pepper mills. There's some drilling to be done. The drilling is not too bad on these. But it's also the scenario sort of just like the pepper mills where we're going to have to drill into end grain. So I'm kind of working on a little bit different ways of doing that. I guess I really didn't set up the other camera, or did I? You can see we'll be able to see what's going on a little bit. It could be zoomed out a little bit. Give me one short second. Come on over here, mouse. It's the pain of having two monitors is. So what would happen if we go wide? Too wide. Medium. Narrow. We'll just go to the narrow one here. And you'll be able to see what we're doing drilling wise. Like I say, it's not real exciting. This wood, I took it to my turning club the other night, and they were kind of baffled in some ways as to what kind of wood this is. It's been around here for years. My brother-in-law got like 3 lengths of wood of it. It's only about 6 inches in diameter, something like that. I cut some of it the other day, and the plan was that I was just going to cut basically some square blocks out of it, which is what this is, but I was going to cut square blocks out of it for sort of a different purpose. Here's the part that's kind of becoming a pain. We need an inch and 3/8 hole up through, which is a little bit smaller. It is smaller than the tea light. Which is okay, because that's where the semi-challenging part in some ways would be for somebody that doesn't have a lot of options in different tools. So in order to drill an 1 3/8 hole into pure end grain, it's a little bit difficult. So if I drill some of it out, let's see if this drill bit will really squeal for me. I have a couple big ugly drill bits that I got a couple of them are from public sales. This one actually even has a Morse taper on it. I think I used this one the other day. Because I want to drill up above the holes. So it would have been a good idea if I would have marked that. So let's say we want to go about 2.5 inches. So I can put a mark right on the drill bit just with a pencil. Hopefully the drill bit doesn't slip at all. Then I'll be able to see that pencil mark. But if I drill a smaller hole, and don't ask me what size drill bit that is because I have no idea. I didn't measure it. It's probably, I'm going to guess that's probably about a 5/8 inch one. Going to slow our speed down nice and slow. Here's a part I'm used to being able to hang onto a chuck. If I get rid of some of the material, it will make the process with the bigger bit much easier. The twist bits actually do a pretty good job of cleaning, keeping the chips going out. They are a little prone to squealing. Oh, my apologies. Hope you don't have earbuds in. This was the one the other day when I used it. Once it gets in pretty deep, like I say, these are old drill bits. It is sharp, but I'm sure these what makes it squeal is the flutes on the side. And I need to go a little bit. Hopefully the noise canceling did that, because that one there, once it gets in so deep, it really wants to squeal. Not sure, not totally sure why that one wants to squeal so bad. But it gave us some relief out of there anyhow. It'll make the 1 3/8 one, it won't make it work quite so hard. Once again, you need to know where we're drilling to. Well, this one actually is shorter. But I'll be able to see once we get beyond the 4 holes. The 4 holes are drilled on the drill press. That's by far the absolute easiest way to do them. Once again, the speed's slow, 400 or 500 RPMs. It's not a race. And that should have opened them holes up. Oh, I didn't drill quite deep enough on them. That's okay. We'll clean that up. The little file or something or other. I found the other day with someone that I drilled, if I was drilling them almost the whole way through, and that didn't work. It really didn't work very well at all. So no, that one I actually drilled too shallow. But once again, it's a little easier. It's still easier to take more material out than have gone too far. Because when I went too far, it left. Don't grab a hold of that bit. That puppy's a little on the warm side. Because when I went too far, then it left like little. Maybe it's kind of hard to explain. It sort of left little like rings in behind there that were another one of those things that then I had to deal with that I didn't necessarily want to have to deal with. So we'll leave it on there. for the moment. I got to drop this down so I can see, make sure I can see what I'm doing, or what, make sure that I have it that I know you can see what I'm doing, put it that way. And hopefully I do. I was going to say, pretty sure I have a tea light down here. So this is what we're using, just a little battery operated tea light. Of course, they're bigger than 1 3/8. Maybe there's maybe there's some sort of metric out there that would actually be the right size, but it's just as easy to open that hole up a little bit. If not even easier, I can be a little bit more in control, I guess you would say. So I use my recess tools for doing lidded boxes. This is probably going to get a bit of a redesign if I'm going to keep making them, because this is not long enough to make the whole recess for that. So I have to switch and use different things, which once again sort of makes it a bit of a problem child. So we can go back up to our turning speed. We can just come in here, nibble away just a little. It's not very much that it takes. And if I get it sloppy, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I like to try and keep them tight. I mean, I do put a little bit of glue on them when I'm done. It'll get the fit first, just on this very end. And now that's sloppy down there. And like I say, it really wouldn't matter. Just as long as I leave the shoulder up there where I need it. It needs to have a shoulder up here to be able to stop on. And that bit, or the cutter, is just, it either grind back further, which might be the path of least resistance, because I really only need about a little over 1/8 of an inch maybe. So we fit into there. Don't jam it in there at this point. Because it might get to be a little difficult to get it out. So I was using you're kind of limited as to what you can use in there. You can't use like a parting tool or anything like that, because it'll hit the sides before it hits where you need to do it. This is a round bar skew. It's not a real good one, but since it's round, it will rub right up against the side, and the only thing it cuts is the very point. So I can go in there and be very gentle and clean off the last little bit with that, so that we get that to go in the whole way. And I want it to go in the whole way. These things have little ears on the bottom of them. I didn't really, there's some of them that I did that sort of, or at least one of them, the ears were still sticking out, which I didn't get the care for. There we go. Now it's the whole way up inside. And when I get it the whole way up inside, and you'll see when we go back to overhead, that way the little sort of flame, I guess you would want to consider it, that way that will stick out the top. We do need to clean up this bottom though. Multitude of things to use. It is end grain, so a scraper is really a good choice for the end grain. Whether it be a traditional scraper or in this case a negative rake, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I just want to cut cleanly, and I want it to be a little bit concaved inward. And that takes care of that. So our tea light can go over there. And those tea lights are very inexpensive on Amazon. I will tell you that. You might as well just say they're cheap. They were like $8 for 24 of them, I think it was. Dowel rod with a piece of glue or a piece of sandpaper on it. So I'm going to sand the inside of this because it's the only time you can do it. And I just sand them with 180. That's it. That's all I'm doing. And if you really, I guess, really wanted to be fussy, if you had a long enough scraper, you could go up there and work on that up in there a little bit. But there again, nobody's going to pick it up and look up in there and say, well, that's pretty ugly looking. And these are not what you call a really expensive piece for somebody to buy. Which is kind of the nice part about making some of this kind of stuff like this. You know, if I can make something like this that you can sell for like $15 is what I ask for them in my market. And I had 4 of them today, and 3 out of 4 of them sold. So I looked at that as being a plus. So bring the live center back up. It's my fancy live center. And then all the rest of it will be from overhead. Once I get my mouse to come over here, we'll go overhead. So now we're going to switch to our shorter tool rest. And I showed my one wood guy these on Tuesday night, and he's like, "Oh, the women at my library, they would just go bananas over them." He said, "Just start making them." He says, "I'll take about a dozen of them." I'm like, "Really, dude?" I'm like, "I don't know if I want to make that many of them," but he's a good guy. He's 90 years old, and he's always been very kind to me and always gets me lots of good wood. So if he wants a dozen of them, he may very well get a dozen. Here's one of the places I sort of cheat. I consider it sort of cheating. I'm going to use a beading cutter, a beading tool, because I'm going to put 2 beads here and probably 1 up here. Or we might do a little bit something different on the top. But definitely the bottom gets 2 beads. And this makes it just, wait a minute. Before we do that, because we change things around and there's a little bit of, with drilling and everything else, it's a little bit distorted down here. Maybe not running quite perfectly true. So the beading cutters don't necessarily like that because they're not really made for that. So we put 1 bead on the bottom. And then we can see pretty much about where, oh, thank you for the sub there, Codes. But we can see where they come around at, so I can just sort of eyeball it a little bit. I could also, with this wood here, it might actually be a little bit advantageous if I put a pencil line around there. Gives me a little bit of a visual reference. And then we'll put a second bead in there. And I think the roof on this one, I think will do something a little bit different compared to what I had been doing with them. And I think my little baby skew on this one, for some reason, it's too big. So evidently I did it. Once again, trying to make two of the same thing can be challenging. I clean some of the chips out of there so when I open the drawers they don't fill up with chips. The person that demonstrated these on YouTube and other, I saw actually two different demonstrations on these this week. They all used a parting tool for this kind of a cut right here, because we're going to drop this level below or down to the level of the beads. It can even be a shade lower than the beads. This makes the beads a little bit more proud. If I turn my parting tool on an angle, it sort of acts like a skew. And that should, keyword, should, give me a nice smooth surface in there. Once again, some of that's going to be determined by this wood. And it did look like it cut it pretty cleanly. The beads are a little rough because this white stuff in here is sort of like a soft area. So we can come above again, and we'll say that's about where we want that. About the same as what it is below it. And I'll make another little parting tool cut in there. And then we can clean out the area in between the two and drop this down to about that level, or even a little bit below that level. Won't hurt us. Multitude of different tools you can use for this. We can use a spindle gouge, we can use a skew. A skew is where I'm going after it. We have to be a little bit careful because of all these holes. So our speed is going to be up there, even with the skew, because it just makes it a little bit more friendly, because it's going to cut quite quickly in those areas where the hole is at. We'll go in both directions. I'm sort of trying to go from like the center out, and we'll sort of give this a little bit of a curve. You wouldn't necessarily have to have a curve. Once again, I haven't really settled in on a definite design that says this is how I want to make them. This is still in kind of the playing around kind of a stage. there again, this is another one of these projects that I don't think there's any real super right and wrong. Looks like I left considerable amount more material there than there, though. Probably shouldn't have done it quite like that. But, like I say, it's doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. Clean that shoulder up a little bit. I think my curve is, since that's longer down there, is what's throwing things off a little bit. I'll take a little bit more off up here. That looks better. That's also why you can't see it, but I step back out of the away from it so I can look at the horizon more level than I did otherwise. So I think we're going to live with that as far as the center goes. So bring a tool rest back down because now we're going to start the roof anyhow. Can't quite do the whole thing at this point because we actually have to flip it around to be able to do the complete roof. But before we do that, we'll actually get some of this done. We'll actually sand all this too. Because sanding on these is actually kind of a little bit of the challenge too. And that little skate earlier is because I didn't have the flute. If I don't have the flute completely closed, or if I wiggle it around, it will skate. It's just a kind of lack of concentration, really. So at this point, it's just sort of get a rough shape to the top. Like I say, we will turn this around and we will be able, if I want to, if I'm so minded, I can use that entire block up there, or I can just use part of it. It's another one of them sort of design sort of opportunity, I guess you would call it. Little things there are just a little bit thick. So I think we're going to need to, we'll have to address that a little bit. I think just a little simple half round file I think is going to do the job. And I'll sort of use it as a draw file because I'll draw it back towards me for the most part so that it doesn't take a chip out of there. once again, it doesn't necessarily, kind of a, I don't know, a little bit of the issue with doing this kind of stuff where you're drilling holes. Not all materials drill very cleanly, you know, with a Forstner bit. Need to look. I think I have some little round drums that'll fit in there. Because otherwise it's not necessarily the cleanest of cuts. And we do have to pay attention to these round holes, especially now they've been cut out here, are rather sharp. Once again, we don't want to add any red color to our work. Let me see. And now I bought these little, oh, they're 1 inch. Ooh. That's 1 inch and a 16th. Nah, that ain't gonna work. Of course not. That one right there is very, very thick. Not quite sure why that one would actually be as thick as what it is. Guess you'd call that a note to self to make sure. Drill a little bit deeper, but not too deep. It does leave a very sharp edge in there, as you can see. We will have to sand and break those corners in there because they do become very sharp as we go along. Not that anybody really should stick their fingers in there, but if somebody can stick their fingers in something, they're going to. Whether they should or shouldn't is another story, but I just know the tendency of people. And I also didn't, oh, that's why. I say I didn't drill that very good, but that's a missed one. It's really the only part of these that you need to be a little bit vigilant on marking is to make sure that you get these holes centered on the block. That's what I was afraid. This stuff is chippy. I took a chip out of that. So we're probably going to have to go back and recut that a little bit. And they're sort of a rustic kind of a project anyhow. At least in my opinion, they're kind of a rustic project. So let me think a minute and see what I know I have some really little kind of drum sanders, I think. Whether I can put my finger on one, that's another story. Some which I know I got from my wife at one time because she was messing around with gourds. I thought we had gotten some, or she had gotten some, that were sort of made for a Dremel. Of course, there's nothing says I can't just use it on a cordless drill. Dremel might be a little bit better. Problem with the Dremels and such things, unless you have the variable speed one, they're just going to spin a little bit too fast. Have a tendency to burn things rather than screw things up. This one's going to get all out of whack on me too. This one might end up being a little bit of designer firewood, because we took chips out. And all that good stuff. At least that looks a little bit. Would really help if you could actually see what you're doing too. That's not going to be the world's best. We're going to go back and do a little recutting because we have some chip out there and a piece chipped out there. So we're going to recut a little bit on there. See if we can get it a little better. So I'll go back to my skew. That's going to give me the best chance of it being cut cleanly. And we'll just shrink this down a little bit. These are probably still better than 1/4 of an inch thick right there, which is more than enough. We could actually take it smaller yet. Probably not enough to get rid of that chip out. Nope, not quite. A little bit left there. So we'll just make it a little bit more straight. Let's see whether we got rid of it. It pretty much has it. These will get rounded over on the edges of the hole, so that will be okay. You need to make one little cleanup cut down that face into the bottom. And that should be that for that part of it. Now, as everything else goes, now we get the sand. I think I think I used all my little strips up. We'll try it with bigger pieces of sandpaper. What I did the other day was literally cut little strips of sandpaper that would fit in there. But I'm not really overly interested. We're sanding across these holes. We're not using a ton of pressure, and make sure our fingers are underneath. It really doesn't, that was cut with a skew, so it really doesn't take much sanding. The part that does take a little bit of sanding is in these grooves, in this groove. But I should be able to do it with a big enough piece of sandpaper. I'll just touch up the beads a little bit. They don't need much touching up. That's the wonders of using the beading tool, is that cuts very, very cleanly. The one guy that I watched on YouTube, he actually textured that down there in between those two little beads. But the particular texturing tool that he used, I do not own. So that kind of leaves that out of the picture for me. And not to mention that particular tool that he was using is actually pretty expensive for all the more that it is. So it's not something I'm overly interested in running out to purchase just to make something like this. But we will go the whole way through the grits as normal. Doesn't take very long. Always making sure that I'm using the cut edge of the sandpaper up against the beads so that I don't create a little valley in there. Just making sure, because it didn't, like I say, that little area in there is what you call a pain in the ass. Works much better if I take the time to actually cut the little, tiny little strips of sandpaper. This is kind of going to be a down and dirty, quick and easy project. Be a one and done kind of a project. Tomorrow is a work day. I should have been sanding that underneath that rim, but I can do that from the other end as well. And that's probably the easiest time to do that. I usually wait and do the outside of this ring once I get it completely sanded it. I'm happy with it, put it that way. I can sand the inside because this left a sharp edge in here. This is where it can be a little challenging when you have bigger fingers to get a piece of sandpaper. This is a piece of cloth back sandpaper, which works real well for things like that because it'll go around a circle. I'm just interested in knocking the sharp edge off. One more. And that's that for that part. Probably so you gotta sort of roll the sandpaper up small. And we'll get these edges knocked off. My wife seems to think all these should be done just in natural wood. This one would actually probably be a candidate for a little color to it, but I don't think we're going to go that route yet. Just to break that sharp corner. That's really all I'm after. I don't want any sharp corners that could cut your fingers. And up until then, they would be sharp enough to cut your fingers. So we'll get rid of the big cone. And that cone is homemade. Piece of resin that's been drilled and tapped for the live center. So we still have a center point. Now we have the adventure of holding it. And what did I do with my, there it is, I think. I probably have to recut that. I do. Once again, using sort of leftover scrap pieces. Wait a minute, no, that's not the one I want. That's why. I want that one. I knew there was something wrong. Leftover pieces. They make a jam chuck. And hopefully, see, that one slides right over and is actually loose. It's a good thing. Sort of. Because we can make it tighter. A little paper towel. The full layer of paper towel. Yeah. Be just tight. Gotta move some things around before I reach back there and stick a hole in my hand. I'm gonna tap that on. I'm going to bring my live center back up to the center point because we had a center point. So I'll push that on with the live center from there. That's enough, more than enough drive to make this spin, to allow this to spin. So now we can finish it off that way. The only other thing we're going to do, and it's a sort of a twofold kind of thing, safety issue, because I don't want it flopping off, because this is when you can break them. I'm going to take some painter's tape. This is 2-inch painter's tape. I'm going to go right over that joint, the joint between the jam chuck and the piece. Like one wrap around is more than enough. It's just to keep it from wanting to vibrate in that direction. And this works very, very well. Very simple to use. We still have tailstock support, so we're not in any kind of jeopardy at this point anyhow. But it just helps to keep, because I don't have much pressure on the tailstock, for one. So we need to get rid of the bulk of the material. And we will use bowl gouge to do so. I can use my little short guy. Bowl gouge is 3/4 of the way we're out. So we change things, we slowed the speed down. And I'm not afraid to run this at full speed because it is perfectly safe. It's between centers. Actually, if we drive too much force that way, we could explode it in that center point, I guess. Haven't had that much force yet, but so we'll just get rid of the material that we don't want. So now we can finish out our roof. We can do it with our bowl gouge just as easily as we could with a spindle gouge. In some ways, maybe even easier because the bowl gouge will allow you to take more material one time and not be too aggressive. Trying to look on the inside. I don't want to, at this point, I don't want to make the outside bigger than the inside. And sort of a judgment call on how high they could be. There again, you would be the designer. And now we'll go back to being more finesse work. And we'll go back to our spindle gouge. Then we'll want a ball up here, somewhere up in here. Can make it big, at least big to start with. Another place to practice our spindle work. We can make our bead. We can make it as big or as small as we want. I do drill the top of these. I did put a A little screw eye in there. Give myself a little bit more room to work. I think that ball to me looks a little bit big. Stuff's kind of dusty. Try and get a nice transition point in there. A little easier to cut it than it is to sand it, but if you don't like what it is, you can always sand it a little bit more. I try to emphasis is on cutting things clean enough that you don't have to sand too much. I don't have a problem sanding out little ridges, but I don't really want to sand to make the shape. And now we just kind of whittle that away to where it's just about nothing. I'm not a real fan of cutting that off. It's got some black stuff in it. That's why I was chattering a little bit. That's some spalting. That's what that would be, sort of. And now I'll just take my little flush saw and we'll actually cut that loose rather than cutting it with the tool. I will go back and cut a little bit, but if I take that big knob off of there, that big knob, especially when they're that size, it could, when I cut through, it could bind in here and could make for a bad day. Because now you spent the last, whatever, 20 minutes or half an hour getting to this point, and because you were too lazy or you're being extra aggressive or whatever, now we're strictly being held by the fit and the tape. So we're going to slow it down a little bit, about half the speed of what I was, because we want to cut the rest of this off. Here's where we need to be very, very gentle. Little baby cuts, because I'm cutting in the direction it's really sort of trying to pull it off. And that's all there is to it. We're careful and not being overly aggressive. So once again, we're back to sanding. We'll get our speed down. These here, usually you can sand around 700 or 800 RPMs. Your fingers are getting hot, slow it down. It'll do a better job sanding slower than it will faster. When you sand too fast, too high a rate of speed on the lathe, then it just wants to skate over the surface rather than cut the surface. Unlike the cutting tools, it's just the opposite. So we get to the very end, if I move the sandpaper up and down, it'll do a better job on that end. Once again, if our shape isn't quite what we wanted it, a little extra sanding right there will make the shape to what you want. Get nice down into that groove, roll it around. But keep in mind though, this edge up here at the top is sharp. Probably right now probably would cut you. And the more I sand, the sharper it's going to get. We want to keep our sandpaper moving so that we don't create perfect concentric circles in the sanding. Not much you can do when you get up onto the bead, but the other parts, if we don't keep it moving, we will put the dreaded radial scratches all the way around. Use a paper towel and clean off the dirt. So it's 320. Go to 400. Gotta find a spot on there that's good. Go to 600. As you can see, the finer I get, probably the lesser amount of time I spend on each grit, because I've gotten rid of any tool marks or any really big scratches. So now it's just a matter of we're trying to make our scratches smaller. At this point, we're going to round this roof over. We're going to stop and we're going to make sure that we have it rounded, that it doesn't cut, that it isn't a sharp enough edge to want to cut you. One last grit, which is 800. And that should be ready for finish. Oh, I got to drill a hole. Well, let me get carried away. I'm going to mark the hole. It's just push the live center point just a little bit into it. And I have a drill bit. Yeah. Then a little mini drill chuck because the screw eyes. I'd have to put a screw eye in. It's in the chuck. I'm not going to use a drill to drive it. I just get it into the center point where I just made, and then just push forward. And you'll know if you go, it really will not allow you to go crooked. It just follows the hole straight in. You gotta make sure you clean. You can't go very far because it gums up the flutes in the drill bit pretty quickly. That should be more than deep enough. These are just tiny little brass screw eyes, so I don't want to. You can't put a whole lot of pressure on them as far as to put them in, or they break. And then you'll really be irritated when they break. The painter's tape is pretty expensive, so this will be right here behind me on the drill press, because this is one of the projects that we will be probably working on throughout the rest of the week. We're going to wipe off the dust as much as we can. And then we'll put some finish on it. It's tight enough that it's not going to wander off on its own. At least I don't think it will. But we can finish the majority of it the way it is right there. I probably could have been so minded if I was doing multiples of these, which is the scenario that we're going to be doing, is doing more than just do one at a time like this. I would probably finish this bottom rim and maybe up into here before I flipped it around to do the top part, because this bottom part then I'm going to have to do by hand. Kind of after the fact, I guess you would say. Another one of these areas where I'm sort of playing, sort of torn between how to finish them, because I want to finish them. This is the kind of project that's kind of like a quick and easy, down and dirty kind of thing. So I don't want to spend a ton of time. I did some with the Parfix CA the other day. I know I did a bowl with this particular stuff. I used the 3408 and found out this stuff is very, very porous. So it didn't do quite the job that I wanted it to do. So this one here, we're going to use the 3460. We can even do this sort of in a little bit of stages. So I want to make sure I get it saturated. A lot more end grain up here, and those sort of those white spots are sort of soft or something or other. The little bowl that I did, I actually wanted to stand up. I was kind of confused why I wanted to stand the grain up so much on them, but it did. So a lesson learned. In a bowl, it's just a matter of a little bit of sanding with some 800 grit sandpaper. Something like this, I don't want to have to go back and sand out rough spots. And they're not super rough. So that part's done. We'll have a try at it. I don't know if we can get in. Should be able to get in underneath there. Just sort of dribbling it over the top. It'll follow around and run into my paper towel. Any problem lies is I can't do this very bottom part, because if I run any out over that edge where that paper towel's at, you can only imagine what a paper towel's going to do. It's going to suck it in, and it's not going to come off that chuck, or the jam chuck. So then we'd be really rather irritated. And I did run some up over there. So where I ran it up over is where I really need to be aware that I get rid of any of the excess up there. It's not been, and it has not been activated, so it's not going to go totally crazy right away. I want to make sure I get any excess off. And I probably should put a little bit on them where the drill holes are at, because it leaves it, if I don't put something around them drill holes, it's going to leave it to be a different color. And I don't want it to be a different color. I want it to all be the same. So a little bit more. We'll go around there. Any problem with putting a little bit of finish and whatnot in them holes, then it really shows that those holes are not very nice and neatly cut. But there's not, I haven't figured out a good way. Might have to go to a bigger hole that one of those little drum sanders would fit in or something. Or just make sure I don't use wood like this. It's prone to chipping and all that good stuff. So that's our outside, almost finished. Give it a nice slow spin. I am going to activate it. I'm going to try and stay away from this area down here. I probably could actually take my paper towel and put it up there. You know, just give it a nice swipe coming from the end across, just a little, just to get it started. And we'll just give that a couple seconds or whatever, and I could actually pull it off, and then we'll just go back to it after the fact. 'Cause I don't have a glove on my left hand, so I don't really want to grab a hold of this without a gloved hand, because any moisture in my fingers will grab a hold of that and make it set up instantly with the moisture. Not to mention, if I put on there now, I have nowhere to sit it. Different. That's what they will look like when they're done. Granted, there's a lot of bright white light here in front of me. It shows up yellow. They're actually brighter than what my wife, when they came, my wife had one out on the fireplace mantle, and she's like, they're a joke. But when you dim the lights down and when they're inside of this, they make this inside sort of glow. So it's kind of interesting. Well, yeah, everybody's making them. So whatever everybody's making, everybody else wants to make them. You know, a couple years ago it was gnomes, and I made a whole shit ton of them, but they died. I don't know about these lanterns. They probably will die too, but yeah, there again, it's a good use of some materials that maybe you might or might not use. The only thing with using just any old material on them, it sort of has to be long enough. At least in my opinion, it needs to be long enough to be able to drill accurately. Because if you get those holes, which we did a pretty good job. If you get the holes too far off, this one's off a little bit right there. These become, the spaces in between the holes can become very much different. So I was off a little bit when I drilled something there, because they're a little bit wider there than they are there. So that's really the only thing. Like I say, they're I guess you want to say they're sort of an eye catcher for the female world. And yeah, and Mike Peace just did a video on YouTube. If you're part of the Wednesday night group with Eddie Castellan, there was a guy on there on Wednesday night that did some of these very, very similar to these. He even, I don't remember what all he did, but his were even like a step above yet. So that made it kind of another interesting thing. But like I say, the layout is really sort of crucial on them. And the really crucial one is side to side. Well, it would be all the way around. This has been cut square. This has been cut on the table saw. So this block is pretty close to being square. Exactly square. That has a little crack there. Maybe I shouldn't be using that as the bottom. Shoot. Well, now you'll see how we're going to lay it out, because we'll just lay it out the other way around. That is a piece of box elder. I think I have my combination square still set. So we're going to come up about 1.5 inches up from the bottom is what I've been using. So if my combination square is set right, I should just get a fat line in the middle. Which, as you can see, I've done a good job as far as that went. This is thicker material than the last one was. try something different too. Let's come up 1 5/8 inches rather than 1.5 inches. And we'll mark our line around. Oh, you didn't do that. You did. Forgot to mark one side. That's a pain. But we have a line to go by, so we'll just reset our square. And we'll mark our lines. And we'll get as close as we possibly can. Get rid of them so that it don't mess up. And we need our ends marked. This is one of them few times that I will go all 4 corners. Like I say, if I did a good job on a table saw, it's basically going to make a sort of a fatter line in there. So they're sort of a simple project, but in the same token, we need to be a little bit careful or vigilant, whatever you want to consider, on our layout of some of this stuff. Accuracy, instead of using a spring punch, I'm just going to use an awl that has a very, very sharp point on it so that I can get a better point, more accurate point. And then we'll mark these. Could probably, if you were doing these as like production kind of work, it probably would pay to be using the same thickness material for any and all of them. But my critic upstairs says that these should have multiple different sizes, different heights. And it's like, well, that's nice, but that also makes it more difficult, or more time consuming, at least anyhow, to do some of this work. So the one I did the other day, everybody else was talking about using a 1-inch drill bit to drill them holes, but to me they seemed a little bit small when you get into this size of material. So there's 1 1/8 inches. I don't want the sides to become super thin. And these are 2 5/8 inches. So 1 1/8 inches would be 7/16. This blank is 2 5/8 by 5.5. Well, that's 1.25 inches. Okay. That's right. The ones I did the other day were 1 1/8 inches. So I do 1.25 inches. And I gave myself some more room down here, so that's still going to leave me 1 inch. All we can do is try it. It's take me just a couple seconds to drill the holes. I'm not, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I'm not real big on making patterns for stuff. Unless I have to do it, I've done some pattern work as far as the lathe goes to make duplicates of stuff, but I'm not a production turner, so I don't really enjoy doing production work. so I kind of try and stay away from it. So the advantage of putting that hole with the awl versus just a pencil line in there, the Forstner bit has a nice little center point that will, as long as you get close to that point, it drops right in it. So I don't have a fence set or anything like that on the drill press. And I don't know that it would be, see, this time I drilled to where, quite, but the 1 3/8 hole that we're going to put up through there should, keyword is should, eliminate them. The other, I don't know if you want to call it a bright idea or a dumb idea I had, and probably not a good idea to do it on box elder because box elder is too soft. My other thought was to drill the hole and go back up in here with the hollowing tool from the end and make these a little bit of a curve on the inside. But it may make it too weak if I did that. But I'm not 100% sure that it would. I'm not going to change tool rests. I'll just do it in 2 halves. And we'll go back to our spindle roughing gouge. Another place where it's multitude of different tools you could use. Anything and everything. You could use your bowl gouge, your skew, spindle gouge, whatever you're most comfortable with. This is where the short tool rest is not necessarily your friend, but just get it close around. Doesn't need to, certainly at this point, doesn't need to be perfectly round. Just sort of a cylinder. We're not really totally do a cylinder, but distracting when I have corners sticking out here just for something like this. Probably more important to have that end be a cylinder. We can make both ends. There's a point of no return once you drill the holes. So that'll work. Mr. Hampton, you're not going to jump on the craze of making silly little things for the holiday season? Don't blame you. That's for sure. I try to stay away from some of that stuff, especially it's actually getting late, really, to be doing this kind of stuff. But we do have one more show, which will be next Saturday. So if I can get a couple of these done this week, why, you know, they will probably go. Surprisingly enough, today, 4 that I had done, one was, I'm thinking what was the one? I think one was a softer maple. Didn't, or no, it was birch. That one actually died a little bit. I think it actually was the first one that went. Ornaments, I have shied away from the ornaments. I just don't. My dad will make the my dad also turns. He gets to make that good quality stuff of ornaments and things like that. He enjoys making them, so I sort of leave that up to him to make. But these lanterns, I don't know, they just seem like a cute little project, and they're cheap enough to make. You know, it's not like you're gonna have, you know, a bunch of money involved as a maker to make them. So let's see if I got my mark still on this dumb drill bit. Where'd it go? So I'm gonna go up into about there. Once again, that's another scenario of, I guess if you really wanted to be fancy, you could try and hollow a little bit up into the top to make them lighter in weight too. But, you know, a lot of this becomes an issue of maybe we should trim up the end. Either that or we didn't get it very well centered. One of the two. Let's see which one it is. I don't really recall that. No, it's just not cut quite square across that end. We should take care of that first. It wasn't even close to being straight. Now it is. So give it a nice cone in there for that drill bit to go into. I guess if you were one of them super adventuresome kind of guys that, like the Richard Raffins and some of them other people of the world, you could probably back hollow that with the spindle gouge. But if you've ever tried it, and I would recommend to try it, just don't do it while somebody's watching, because it can be rather comical. You can have some really, really beautiful catches and send things flying. It is something I would like to learn and be better at, certainly than what I am. I will apologize, because this drill bit here is probably about ready to squeal like a little pig.
I'm not going to listen to it this time. I'll just drill the rest of it with the 1 3/8. Once it gets in there about 1.5 inches or so, it's probably has seen its better days on that, maybe. There's a little variation in the lathe height. The lathe is aligned side to side, or yeah, side to side, but I can tell you right now, this is a Laguna. The 2 points sort of have a tendency, in my opinion, they sort of run downhill, and it's not much, but it doesn't take much to not cooperate with certain drill bits. So we'll drill our 1 3/8. Mr. Hampton, did you buy the tea lights off of Amazon? More importantly, did you buy the fancy ones that were like $1 and something a piece? Or did you go the cheap route like I did and buy the ones that were like $8 or something like that for 24 of them? Once again, I didn't go quite deep enough on the drill bit. Irritating. Some of the ones I did the other day, I felt that I went too far, too deep, because I was going about halfway through the blank, and it left the curve. Okay, that's the ones my wife thought I should have bought. They're on for 6 hours and off for 18 hours, I think is what she saw. And I'm like, well, we don't know whether these things are gonna, gonna sell or whatever. So I'm a little skeptical to go that route. I mean, that still makes them. Did you say a dozen of them for $10? That's still less than $1 a piece. I can't imagine that they're going to be, what do you want to call it, primo kind of stuff? I guess I would call it. I mean, they can't be super great. This time we are going to try this because I don't want to dig that stuff out this time. I think we're going to see if we can make it explode. So we're going to go in here with our little negative, it's a negative rake scraper is really what it is. Hollowing made really easy. What I call this. I can look through the holes. I mean, you can see it too. I can look through the holes and see what I'm doing. So that's kind of a cheater's way to do that. Can't say that it's necessarily the cleanest cut in the world. I think I could go a little bit more. So once again, one of them holes, two of them holes maybe, are not quite, what do you call it, quite as perfect as what you could do them. And as you saw, I laid them out very well, but there's a lot of factors that would caused them to be off slightly. Not that the average person would ever even notice that, unless they were off considerably, I guess. So that works. Lesson learned. It's just as easy to go up in there and do that little bit. It's probably going to give it a nicer end result. At least that's my thought. Did I concave that a little bit? Yes. So now we can get our tea light to fit. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, how can they be hard on batteries? They're such a little light, and it's not exactly like they put out a ton of light. I think these that I got, I think they said they were supposed to last 1,000 hours, because that's what some of the people asked me today. They're like, "How do you get the light out of there?" I said, "You don't." I said, "But you can, it's got a battery in it, and it's got a compartment to be able to change the battery." So, and I think these said they were supposed to be good for 1,000 hours, and I'm like, 1,000 hours or something like that. You're only going to use them for a couple of weeks in the holiday season or whatever. But maybe not. Maybe you're going to use them a lot more than that. But what are you using to hollow that out in there, if I might ask? Not that there's 9 million ways of doing it. This little round bar skew actually works probably as good as anything so far, rather than me trying to regrind a tool or something along those lines to be able to make it. And I don't own one of those. What did Mike Peace use? He used a box scraper, one of them scrapers is just on an angle. And I'm like, once again, I'm not going to run out and buy one of them. First off, I wouldn't run out and buy one anyhow, but because what I've found is this one here that I use. This is sort of copying Cindy Drozda's box making one. That's like $12 piece of steel from Amazon. It's a piece of high-speed steel. They're fly cutters, I think they call them. Yeah, well, that's sort of what my wife said, and my dad said the same thing. He said, "Well, hey, you should be able to turn them on and turn them and let them go or whatever." I'm like, well, it's kind of lazy, but like whatever. I said, if we, one of them things, if they're successful, even though I only have one show left, try not to jam them in there before they're ready. But are you gluing yours in too? A little bit of some sort of glue to make them stay? Or are you just using a friction set? There we go. That's plenty. Just snug. Liquid nails craft glue. I've never seen that. Is that a polyurethane glue? I'm not familiar with that one. Oops, you gotta sand it a little bit inside. I just used a little bit of the ones I did yesterday, I guess it was. Yeah, yesterday. I used a little bit of 5-minute epoxy because I needed to mix up some. Once again, it's probably being kind of lazy on my part. I needed to mix up a little bit of 5-minute epoxy because I do the pepper mills that I made for this year had a salt shaker to go with it. So I have the little metal cap for the salt shaker, and that I used just a tiny bit of 5-minute epoxy to keep them in. So I just used
a 5-minute epoxy on the lights. Just a couple little drops in there. So we got to go back to our cone live center. So like I say, in my case, this is a resin one. That way I don't feel it. The reason I like the resin one is then I don't feel bad when I nick it. Because there's always, like especially with doing the pepper mills, there's always a time when I need to cut the tenant a little bit shorter on a pepper mill. So putting a nick in that one, it's like, you know, I just make a new one. You know, it's not like I've, you know, put a nice deep gouge in the aluminum one that who knows how much it would cost to actually replace the aluminum one. This way it's kind of like cheap and dirty, I guess you'd say. Because I do mess around a little bit with resin casting. This time we're going to be smart enough to clean this up. Okay. And it was made by Gorilla. Who did you say it was made by? Gorilla Glue. Oh, Liquid Nails. Yeah. If I had to venture a guess, I would say it's some sort of a polyurethane glue. They're the ones that generally will do that kind of stuff. Probably had a fairly long setup time to go with it. It's been years since I've used any of that. I tried some of that many years ago doing flat type work. And I didn't really particularly care for it doing the flat work because it's a little bit harder to clean off of, like glue joints and things like that. And it also if it's something I needed extra time to be able to get something assembled, then it was nice, but otherwise it didn't. Kind of different. But for this kind of a purpose, that would work good.
especially if it's being bought at a craft store like that. It probably came in like a little 2-ounce bottle or something like that, so you wouldn't be purchasing a bunch of it. So we'll do our cheater move and we'll cut our beads. Kind of having trouble seeing where the ghost image was. Sorry about my reach. What would happen? Shit, I might have went too. Let's do something different. Maybe make this easier. This is not really the good way of doing the multiple beads. I don't know if you're familiar with the D-Way beading tools. It's amazing how many people, demonstrators, that call themselves professionals, I've seen them demonstrate these tools and say, well, it's really hard. You cut that bead and you go to do the next one. I'm like, did you watch the video that D-Way has out there that tells you not to do it that way? Okay. The latex nail, or the latex glue. Okay. I assume craft stores, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, and them places. I'm gonna assume. And they'll give it a different look. Also, not necessarily the wonders of box elder and what is essentially a scraper. Oh, okay. I'll have to look at it, look for it. It's going to be clean enough, so we need one. Guess if we wanted to be technical, we could actually measure it. Distance, about a quarter. The only thing with these beading tools that I found is a little bit cumbersome. They don't really like to be out. They like to be out over the end. Yeah, I agree. I should be, but I like the consistency of the beading tools, especially for doing stuff like this where I'm going to doing the single bead is one thing, but when you do 3 of them side by side, then unless you're having if you're having a good day and you do a lot of it, because there again, I do not do a lot of, really don't do a lot of spindle work. I do more bowls than anything. So I have a tendency to be, I don't know, I would consider it kind of laziness, maybe. Or use the tools at your disposal. And I do have the beading tools, so I have a tendency to use them quite often on things like that, even though I should be doing more of the freehand spindles, beads like that. exactly. That's that's sort of what I tell people. I'm like, don't run out because the dumb things are expensive. And I'm sure they have. It's been quite a number of years since I purchased them, but when I purchased them, they were 40 couple dollars a piece. Which is when it comes right down to it, it's kind of expensive for something like that for a specialty tool, and that's what I would consider. I'm the same way with that little box inside box kind of type scraper. Oh, that didn't do a nice job in there. Kind of hate box elder in some ways. Skew should cut that perfectly clean, but it didn't, which is kind of irritating. It's not quite down to where I want it, but that's also an indication it might not cut it clean any further down. But we're going to go down a little bit deeper. Okay, so that was in the white stuff, so that got that. Are you making yours flat from roof to whatever you're doing at the base, or are you making them a curve? If I might ask. Mike Peace did his, and they were flat, and I was kind of confused why he made them flat, but yeah, so that's sort of where I went with it. I mean, it's a very in this case here, it's a very gentle curve, but I just think I'm trying to think. The guy on Wednesday night, do you participate in the worldwide wood turners on Wednesday night? Eddie Castellan it's on Zoom. The guy that did the demonstration on Wednesday night, I think he actually made these even more like I think one of his designs was making these almost like a globe or a ball there. But he said his success rate with making them a ball wasn't necessarily very good because the more you mess with it, the thinner it becomes. Yeah, the one that he was making, I was down here messing around doing my own thing, but um, I have a big monitor right here that I use for the live stream. So to watch something like that on Wednesday night, I was watching, and he had the one where he did using the router to do like flutes in it, and I'm like, man, I'm like, you must have a better market for these than what I would think I do to go to that amount of work to make those flutes. And he even said himself that the success ratio on that is not overly good. I think we better quit while we're ahead before we get behind. We'll get rid of that little whizzer in there. So I'm just not sold on this thing of these being that big in diameter. Really should go back and look up the article in the AAW journal to see if he gave any dimensions. See why I say I like my sort of disposable live center? I guess I don't. I mean, to me, that would be. I would think it would be somebody special that you were going to go to that much work for. Of course, I think from the different stuff that guy shows quite often, I don't remember whether he sells his stuff or not, or tries to sell it or whatever. I think most of what he does, he gives it away. But yeah, to me, that sort of took a simple project and made it into a complicated kind of a project to me. But I think he said he's retired and probably has nothing better to do, so. I did one the other day. To where I had that bead there. Oh, yeah. Well, like I say, my dad is like 88 years old or whatever, and he'll often say different things like that. It's like, Dad, you see how that guy did that? I'm like, Dad, I said, that's somebody that has all the time in the world. And probably if you knew it all, I don't know if he's ever said, he probably was an engineer when he was working. I said, they're the kind of people that want to do the things that would drive most people nuts. Has been my experience with those people that they try. A lot of them overthink things like that to me and make it more complicated than what it needs to be by far. I guess if there's one good thing with the bigger ones, it's going to make it easier to sand. This time I'm going to put my dust collector on because I know this will be rather choking. And I think we'll just go up and get fresh sandpaper. also a place that's a little bit easier if I would use the longer strips, but like I say, I'm just kind of being lazy in a way here. Probably a little bit safer to use the longer strips so that my fingers aren't even anywhere close to those holes. I haven't got my finger stuck in one, so. I thought of that too. I'm like, that would be interesting, but as you said earlier, we were discussing a little bit earlier, at where do you stop at the price point that you're going to be able to get the money out of them? I also still have some of the Spectra ply, and I think I'm going to give one of those a try. I have some small pieces that I may not necessarily. I know there's a couple of them that I only have like one piece of it left. One of that particular color, I should say. So I may try some of them. And what I have is about anywhere from 2 inches to 2 and a quarter. So there'll be a smaller size lantern, which I like. I like the smaller ones better. That's just my opinion. My wife seems to think that we need to have 20 different sizes. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. Because the bottom line is next Saturday will be the last craft show that we do for the season, as far as I know. So, I mean, I do have some other people that would like some of these. Some of it to me, some of this you just sort of have to draw the line on where you're going to go. I think it would make it, in some ways, a little bit easier to do them in two pieces that maybe you did from the roof line to there, or even just leave that bead off and make a separate roof, and then you would have to cut a recess in there or something like that. I think it would look interesting. But once again, is it worth? I have a tendency to look at what's worth the time and the effort. Just like everything else in this kind of stuff, I mean, you could just go flat out crazy with it. Now you could probably put a little, if you really wanted to, you could probably put a little natural edge roof on there. Tiny little, half a bowl or something like that, natural edge. That might look interesting too. Just a thought, it's just a thought, it's, and like I said, as to what rabbit hole you want to go down. I've done some of the birdhouse ornaments with the real small natural edge roof on them. Yeah, well, I agree with that. That's where my wife and I disagree on things like this. Is I want to be able to make these pretty much the same dimension-wise, so that I have the jam chuck that holds them. That dimension is not going to change because the tea light size is the same. And one of them, I think there's another video out there on YouTube. It's actually the guy that Mike Peace that wrote the article for AW, and he talked about, oh, that would be neat. That's got to be a very special person to give that one to, or try and sell it. There again, a lot of that stuff to me is when you start talking about trying to sell some of that stuff. I mean, what I can get for it in my market versus what some of these other people claim that they get for them is definitely two different scenarios. I do it more for the fun of it, but as well as I do, this fun little habit ends up having just tons and tons of stuff sitting around your house, and you can kind of only give so many things to your relatives or friends before they're like, oh no, no thank you, I have enough of that, I have enough of this. Are you selling yours, or are you giving them away, if I might ask? You go to craft shows. Some people do deal with galleries and things of that nature. I'm not one of them, but. And what part of the country do you live in, if I might ask? Oh, okay. Well, then you can get some good money for yours. At least so everybody that I've ever talked to that's like from your kind of area or whatever. I've been out to Jimmy Clue's and taken classes with him twice, I guess it's been. And there was a fellow there from California, and he's like, "Oh no, you could get a lot of money for that." It was some of the projects that we made at Jimmy's, but he's like, "Oh, you could get a lot of money for that." I'm like, "Dude, I couldn't get $25 or $30 for that if I was lucky." But there again, everybody likes to sort of talk about what they feel they can get for things. Maybe they can, maybe I there again, you don't know whether somebody's blowing smoke up your ass or what they're doing. I really wish I could really should be brave enough to go up in here with a scraper. The Forstner bit just does a crappy job up in there. But I think with that amount of overhang, I don't think that I can go up there and be overly successful. That means I have to use a small scraper. My Thompson one might actually work better. So if you're in California, do you like the D-Way tools, or do you like Thompson? Or whose tools do you like? Let me put it that way. Let's rephrase that. Still a little high. Myself, I'm pretty much I agree 100% on that one. Wow, that actually worked pretty good. There you go. Lesson learned.
Oh, it might have worked pretty good, but it didn't do any better job. Gotcha.
The only Carter and Son one that I have is the thread chasing one. Pretty much the majority of everything else is Thompson. I have a couple Sorbies hanging around that I sort of started out with in my turning adventure some 15 or 16 years ago, thereabouts. Then I went to a couple shows and different things, and I've pretty much have stuck with the majority of it's Thompson. I do have a couple. Of course, the beating tools are D-Way. This little negative ray scraper is the D-Way as well. Which is kind of a nice little scraper. I mean, they're saying it's the Box Master, which is D-Way, but it does a nice job. But there again, it's a little bit questionable to have that, especially to have that amount of overhang on it. It will start to vibrate pretty quickly. See if I can clean up any of that. See if this one does a better job. This one is actually a Thompson one. I don't imagine it did it any cleaner, but it certainly is. It's certainly an extra step that makes me happier. I mean, it's still not as clean of a cut as what one would like, but at least it doesn't have the giant sized chunks out of it that the Forstner bit did. As you know as well as I do, if you worked with any box elder, it's kind of a problem child when it comes to that stuff. Are you sanding these holes at all that you're drilling? This actually looks like these actually cut pretty cleanly. Okay. I do not own any of them. I'm not a fan of the carbides, but I've been told the same thing, that they do pretty good when it comes to that, which would make sense. I mean, end grain really just likes a sharp edge. What are you using to touch that hole up? Many, many moons ago, I got one of these little mandrels. Now this size would actually work in there. I'm sure they probably make these in a smaller size. Maybe I'm going the wrong way. I'll screw around and get that so tight I won't be able to get it all. That's sort of what I've been doing, just a little bit of hand sanding. And there again, I don't, you know as well as I do, the person that would think differently of something like that is a fellow wood turner. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. But now this one is more like a 1 inch diameter, so I'm thinking maybe it'll work. It's certainly worth a couple minutes here to try it. And then we're going to be done. Tomorrow for me is a work day. I'm not going to finish. I will put this will also get the super glue finish on, so I will put that on the base of this one up into here or whatever, and then I'll finish that another day. See, now that size hole, I think that's, as you can see, I'm not going crazy with it, and I couldn't find a grit size on it, but that's pretty fine. I'd say it's probably at least 220 maybe. And surprisingly enough, this box elder actually drilled actually pretty darn clean through there. Did a cleaner job than what some of the beads are, for sure. Of course, now I did that, and I got to go back and re-round these edges a little bit. Piece had it. What are you finishing with yours with? Yeah, in theory. There's still a very small contact area. Really, no matter what. This is something we discussed. I used to help with girls softball, and it would apply to the same, it would apply the same as this. Now this dumb little thing here is not a very good one. It's some sort of little mini flap wheel. So that's pretty poor. But the actual contact point on this diameter versus this diameter is literally no different. The only difference would be this one will try and create that little cone or that little divot quicker than this one will, but the actual contact surface is pretty much the same. Okay. I'm kind of fighting with that too. I mean, I'm a distributor of the Perfect CA, so that's generally what most of my, probably 95% of my stuff has on it. There is some of these though that I did spray with lacquer. Like I said, I used to make a lot of furniture stuff. I don't make much of it anymore because I don't have time for that. So I do have a turbine sprayer, and I sprayed the couple that went to the show today. I did spray them with lacquer, but you know, it's more time consuming for me, at least, to spray something like this in lacquer, because you're going to need to put a couple coats on and wait for it to dry and all that stuff. That's really probably the main reason, and this goes back a couple years ago, that I started using the Perfect CA, and then it became an issue of being able to get it. So they had an ad in the AAW magazine at one point saying about distributors. And I talked to Mark Soleil before I even became a distributor. I'm like, dude, I don't want to hone in on your turf. And he's like, no, you're not honing in on my turf. He said, you go for it. Of course, now, as you very well know, because you watch Wednesday evenings, that his health is very much declined. This is something he never really talked about any of the times I saw him demonstrate. His opinion of the 3460 was strictly pens and things you were going to do multiple coats. But the person that I am that likes to experiment with things says that this works really well on things like this. The box elders, I have some white birch. It's not going to work so well across them. Things kind of the woods that are very porous. This being a little bit thicker allows it to not soak in quite as far as what the 3408 will. And it's still the same process. White, put a liberal amount on, let it soak in, wipe off the excess. As you can see up in here, it's already soaked in to where it's disappearing. Of course, in the same token, then tomorrow or some other day when I finally finish that top part, then I'm going to have to buff them, and I will use the Vonex to buff that, which I also have. They also sell, I should say. But it is a nice buffing compound. I will give it that. That's versus the white diamond. As far as I'm concerned, there's not much of a comparison. White diamond is a little bit more abrasive than the Vonex. The Vonex does it does a nicer job on all the things that I would possibly use, whether it be the super glue finishes or even the lacquers. It does a good job buffing the lacquers. As long as you don't sit still in a spot, like the center of a bowl. Found out that the hard, that's what you call depth of knowledge of somebody who's made the mistake and almost pretty much ruined a piece. Because if the bowl's small enough, you know, like 7 inches in diameter, I think it is kind of like the magic number, you can buff the inside of it with the bigger buffing wheel. The problem lies is the buffing wheel, if this is the center of the bowl, the buffing wheel literally sat here in about an 1.25 1.5 circle, right dead center. And as I buffed around the bowl and got to the opposite place where I started, I'm like, wow, that's really doing a nice job. Right up until I pulled it away from there and said, holy shit, it just dug a hole right through 3 or 4 or 5 layers of between the sanding sealer shellac that I use, and I think it had 3 coats of lacquer or 4 coats of lacquer over top of that. It literally burned a hole right through the center of it. And I'm like, son of a booger. That wasn't a good day. But lesson learned. And share that little tidbit of information with somebody else, and maybe they won't make the same mistake as you did, but yeah, that's what I said. Especially seeing how it was actually a nice maple bowl. It was a curly maple. I tried to fix it once. I'm not even sure where it's at anymore. I'm gonna go back and put a little bit more on this one and get it to stand up there, because it was completely finished. You know, there was no tenon or anything left on the bottom of it. It's finished inside and out. So I have no real way of remounting it on the lathe except just fiddle farting around with a vacuum chuck or something like that to try and get it back to where it's centered, at least centered well enough to be able to either make a cut or two across it to remove all the finish, or try and sand back through all the finish. Either one. And I know it's sitting over there on the shelf somewhere, but it's like, you know, one of them irritating things is like, you just sit off to the side and consider it lesson learned and move on. You know, tomorrow's another day, I guess you'd say. So, are you going to cooperate? You should sit upright, you dumb thing. Yeah, close enough. I am going to... That I definitely would not have to activate. Either one of them, but... Give it a little tiny little squirt. It's going to call that it. That's going to call it a day for me. Like I said, it is a work day. I know you're in California and it's 2 hours or whatever it is behind us, but it's almost 9 o'clock here. It will, if only the red in the box elder would stay red, that would make a really cool looking piece. But you know as well as I do that given Mother Nature and time, that will no longer be red. It'll turn a brown, kind of a shitty looking brown, no less. Oh yeah.
Are you watching any of Richard Raffin's videos that he's putting out these days? I find them very interesting. I watch him. I subscribe to his channel and I watch them. I think they're very interesting. He does some things that are, I don't know, different. Some things that maybe I would say maybe he shouldn't necessarily show, but that's his thing. So, because he definitely does some things that could possibly have some ill effects on some people that doesn't understand necessarily what could happen, but to each his own. He loves the spindle gouge, but there is definitely some lessons to be learned from him. And I have learned a few things that can make life a little bit easier. For one, I sort of grew up that, the negative rake scrapers were the way to go. They're kind of idiot proof and all that. In there again, some Amazon steel, some of the fly cutters. Okay, I've never met him. I've never been at a symposium that he's been at. Because I definitely would have went and watched him. But I don't know if you played around with any of, since you watch him, it's like, wow, these scrapers, especially this one here, is 8 by 30 by 200. That's all in millimeters. This is probably the first one the second one maybe, because I made all three of these so far. This is sort of a copy of Cindy Drozd's, if you've ever watched her do the box making ones. This one is a negative rake. But in order to buy that from her, granted it would be a Thompson tool, so I mean it would last me a lifetime and then some. But I'm like, it would have cost me $100. And I'm like, I don't make that many boxes to spend $100 on a single tool. So I had talked to somebody else, and they're like, well, you just get the fly cutters, I think is what they consider them. You can get them from Amazon. One of that size are, anywhere from $8 to $12 or $13. It does take a fair amount of grinding to get them to, especially the tang part of them. But I'll tell you what, this scraper right here, with just a skewed edge, I don't have it ground as steep of an angle as what he talks about. I am working on rounding over this edge of it to make it slide better on the tool rest. But I've gotten the hang of using that, and like on the outside of bowls and stuff like that. I don't really have one that's a non-negative rake to do anything on the inside. But that dumb little thing there is quite amazing what it does on the outside of a bowl. And it's really kind of forgiving. And everybody taught me, if you're going to use a traditional scraper, it's got to be at a really, a big downward angle. I'm like, okay. But you watch him, and I'm like, that's not much of a downward angle. Actually, if you put it down further, this actually becomes very aggressive. It just needs that slight little bit of downhill, and it becomes very, very friendly and very easy to use. Use it up on its edge. I have not had a catch with it up on its edge yet. I would imagine that the key point there is the same as the skew. It needs to remain below the center point of the tool. And the last one that I just got this one, I don't know, probably a week or two ago. Like I say, another piece of Amazon steel. And he likes to use his so-called straight one, but it's got a little curve to it. This one here, I don't know what its issue is. It's ground the same as this one, but I cannot get this one, the smaller one, to be non-aggressive. So I do have to work with that one a little bit more, or change it, or do something different with it. I would kind of like to do one he uses one, and there's some other people using the one that's the spear point one, and that may end up being that one there. But it is quite a bit of grinding on them, because I don't know that I could cut them with a cutoff wheel or not, but I just grind them. I just come down, every day after work or whatever, I'll come down and piddle around with something like this, and I'll grind on it until it gets hot, hot on my fingers, sit it on the table saw, I'll go back to work and come back, 15, 20 minutes later or what have you, and go at it again and get it, get more of it off. So that's what I was doing with them. But I appreciate you chatting with me. But I am going to call it an evening. I am here normally on Saturday evenings. Like I said, I have one more craft show next week, and then I will definitely be here Saturday evenings, usually somewhere between 5 and 6 o'clock. I can't give you an exact time. That would be East Coast, Eastern's time. I'm usually doing something different. Whatever, I don't necessarily, I'm not one of them that's doing a project per se. It's generally whatever I need to be working on at that particular time. So, until then, you all have a wonderful week, and we will see you next Saturday, if you so desire. Oh, you're quite welcome. Yeah, you're quite welcome. Stop back. Like I say, I've learned a lot over the years by watching some other people do things, and I'm not afraid to try things. So, yeah, it's fun. It's different. I'm not sure I like the bigger lanterns, but we'll see what the critic upstairs says once it's done. But yeah, I don't know. Happy turning. There's lots of other. If you've been to the YouTube channel, there's other lives and other stuff like that on there. I'm pretty much too lazy to. I shouldn't say lazy. I don't have the time or maybe the patience to sit there and edit videos, to edit this 2 hours down into 20 minutes or 30 minutes and have it make sense to me. So I just do them live. But like I say, that's my Saturday evening gig generally. But thanks for hanging out, and we shall see you another day.